The Handley Page Victor is a British jet-powered strategic bomber, developed and produced by the Handley Page Aircraft Company, which served during the Cold War. It was the third and final of the V-bombers operated by the Royal Air Force, the other two V-bombers being the Avro Vulcan and the Vickers Valiant. The Victor had been developed to perform as part of the United Kingdom's airborne nuclear deterrent. In 1968, the type was retired from the nuclear mission following the discovery of fatigue cracks, which had been exacerbated by the RAF's adoption of a low-altitude flight profile to avoid interception. A number of Victors had received modifications to undertake the strategic reconnaissance role, employing a combination of radar, cameras, and other sensors. The nuclear deterrence mission was given to the Royal Navy's submarine-launched Polaris missiles in 1969. A large V-bomber fleet was deemed surplus to requirements. Consequently, many of the surviving Victors were converted into aerial refueling tankers. During the Falklands War, Victor tankers were notably used in the airborne logistics operation to repeatedly refuel Vulcan bombers on the way to and from the Black Buck raids. The Victor was the last of the V-bombers to be retired, the final aircraft being removed from service on 15 October 1993. In its refueling role, the type had been replaced by the Vickers VC-10 and the Lockheed TriStar. Development origins. The origin of the Victor and the other V-bombers is heavily linked with the early British atomic weapons program and nuclear deterrent policies that developed in the aftermath of the Second World War. The atom bomb program formally began with Air Staff Operational Requirement or 1001 issued in August 1946, which anticipated a government decision in January 1947 to authorize research and development work on atomic weapons. The U.S. Atomic Energy Act of 1946 having prohibited exporting atomic knowledge, even to countries that had collaborated on the Manhattan Project, or 1001 envisaged a weapon not to exceed 24 feet 2 in length, 5 feet in diameter, 10,000 pounds in weight, and suitable for release from 20,000 feet to 50,000 feet. At the same time, the Air Ministry drew up requirements for bombers to replace the existing piston-engined heavy bombers such as the Avro Lancaster and the new Avro Lincoln, which equipped RAF Bomber Command. In January 1947, the Ministry of Supply distributed Specification B 3546 to aviation companies to satisfy Air Staff Operational Requirement or 229 for a medium-range bomber land plane capable of carrying one 10,000 pounds bomb to a target 1,500 nautical miles from a base which may be anywhere in the world. A cruising speed of 500 knots at heights between 35,000 feet and 50,000 feet was specified. The maximum weight when fully loaded ought not to exceed 100,000 pounds. The weapon's load was to include a 10,000 pounds special gravity bomb, or over shorter ranges 20,000 pounds of conventional bombs. No defensive weapons were to be carried. The aircraft relying on its speed and height to avoid opposing fighters. The similar or 230 required a long-range bomber with a 2,000 nautical miles radius of action at a height of 50,000 feet, a cruise speed of 575 miles per hour, and a maximum weight of 200,000 pounds when fully loaded. Responses to OR 230 were received from Short Brothers, Bristol, and Handley Page. However, the Air Ministry recognized that developing an aircraft to meet these stringent requirements would have been technically demanding and so expensive that the resulting bomber could only be purchased in small numbers. As a result, realizing that the majority of likely targets would not require such a long range, a less demanding demanding specification for a medium-range bomber. Air Ministry Specification B-3546 was issued. This demanded the ability to carry the same 10,000 pounds bomb load to a target 1,500 nm away at a height of 45,000 to 50,000 feet at a speed of 575 miles per hour. HP. The design proposed by Handley Page in response to B-3546 was given the internal designation of HP-80. To achieve the required performance, Handley Page's aerodynamicist Gustav Lachmann and his deputy, Godfrey Lee, developed a crescent-shaped swept wing for the HP-80. The sweep and chord of the wing decreased in 3 distinct steps from the root to the tip, to ensure a constant limiting Mach number across the entire wing and consequently a high cruise speed. Early work on the project included tailless aircraft designs, which would have used wingtip vertical surfaces instead. However, as the proposal matured, a high-mounted, full tailplane was adopted instead. The profile and shaping of the crescent wing was subject to considerable fine-tuning and alterations throughout the early development stages, particularly to counter unfavorable pitching behavior in flight. The HP-80 and Avro's Type 698 were chosen as the best two of the proposed designs to be 3546, and orders for 2 prototypes of each were placed. It was recognized, however, that there were many unknowns associated with both designs, and an order was also placed for Vickers' design, which became the Valiant. Although not fully meeting the requirements of the specification, the Valiant design posed little risk of failure and could therefore reach service earlier. The HP-80's crescent wing was tested on a 1/3 scale glider, the HP-87, and a heavily modified Supermarine attacker, which was given the Handley Page HP-88 designation. The HP-88 crashed on the 26th of August 1951 after completing only about 30 flights, and little useful data was gained during its brief 2 months of existence. By the time the HP-88 was ready, the HP-80 wing had changed such that the former was no longer representative. The design of the HP-80 had sufficiently advanced that the loss of the HP-88 had little effect on the program. 2 HP-80 prototypes, WB-771 and WB-775, were built. WB-771 was broken down at the Handley Page factory at Radlett and transported by road to RAF Boscombe Down for its first flight. Dual doses were used to clear the route and create paths around obstacles. Sections of the aircraft were hidden under wooden framing and tarpaulins printed with GELEYPANDHY Southampton to make it appear as a boat hull. In transit, GELEYPANDHY was an anagram of Handley Page marred by a signwriter's error. On the 24th of December 1952, piloted by Handley Page's chief test pilot Hedley Hazelden, WB-771 made its maiden flight, which lasted for a total of 17 minutes. 10 days later, the Air Ministry announced the aircraft's official name to be Victor. The prototypes performed well. However, several design failings led to the loss of WB-771 on the 14th of July 1954, when the tailplane detached whilst making a low-level pass over the runway at Cranfield, causing the aircraft to crash with the loss of the crew. Attached to the fin using 3 bolts, the tailplane was subject to considerably more stress than had been anticipated, and the 3 bolts failed due to metal fatigue. Additionally, the prototypes were considerably tail-heavy due to the lack of equipment in the nose. This was remedied by large ballast weights being fitted upon the prototypes. Production Victors had a lengthened nose that also served to move the crew escaped or further from the engine intakes. The fin was shortened to eliminate the potential for flutter, while the tailplane attachment was changed to a stronger 4-bolt fixing. Victor B-1 production B-1 Victors were powered by the Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire ASA 7 turbojets rated at 11,000 lbf, and was initially equipped with the Blue Danube nuclear weapon, re-equipping with the more powerful Yellow Sun weapon when it became available, although Victors also carried US-owned Mark Chapter 5 nuclear bombs and the British Redbeard tactical nuclear weapon. A total of 24 were upgraded to B-1A standard by the addition of red steer tail warning radar in an enlarged tail cone and a suite of radar warning receivers and electronic countermeasures from 1958 to 1960. On the 1st of June 1956, a production Victor XA-917 flown by test pilot Johnny Allen inadvertently exceeded the speed of sound after Allen let the nose drop slightly at a higher power setting. Allen noticed a cockpit indication of Mach 1.1 and ground observers from Watford to Banbury reported hearing a sonic boom. The Victor maintained stability throughout the event. Aviation author Andrew Brooks has claimed that Allen broke the sound barrier knowingly to demonstrate the Victor's superiority to the earlier V-bombers. The Victor was the largest aircraft to have broken the sound barrier at the time. Victor B-2 The RAF required a higher ceiling for its bombers, and a number of proposals were considered for improved Victors to meet this demand. At first, Handley Page proposed use of the 14,000 lbf Sapphire 9 engines to produce a Phase 2 bomber, to be followed by Phase 3. Victors with much greater wingspan, and powered by Bristol's Siddeley Olympus turbojets or Rolls-Royce Conway turbofans. The Sapphire 9 was cancelled, however, and the heavily modified Phase 3 aircraft would have delayed production. So an interim Phase 2A Victor was proposed and accepted, to be powered by the Conway and having minimal modifications. The Phase 2A proposal was accepted by the Air Staff as the Victor B-2, with Conway RCO 11 engines providing 17,250 lbf. The new Conway engines required redesigned enlarged intakes to provide the greater airflow required. The wingtips were extended, increasing the wingspan to 120 feet. The B-2 featured distinctive retractable elephant ear intakes not found on the B-1, located on the rear fuselage forward of the tail fin. These scoops fed ram air-to-ram air turbines which could provide electrical power during emergency situations, such as engine failure. During flight, the first prototype Victor B-2, serial number XH668, made its maiden flight on the 20th of February 1959. It had flown 100 hours by the 20th of August 1959, while high-altitude engine tests were being carried out by the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment. It disappeared from radar screens, crashing into the sea off the coast of Pembrokeshire. An extensive search operation was initiated to locate and salvage the wreckage of XH668 to determine the cause of the crash. It took until November 1960 to recover most of the aircraft. The accident investigation concluded that the starboard pitterhead had failed in flight, causing the flight control system to force the aircraft into an unrecoverable dive. Only minor changes were needed to resolve this problem, allowing the Victor B-2 to enter service in February 1962. Further development. A total of 21 B-2 aircraft were upgraded to the B-2R standard with Conway RCO 17 engines and facilities to carry a Blue Steel standoff nuclear missile. The wings were modified to incorporate 2 speed pods, or Kajeman carrots. These were anti-shock bodies, bulged fairings that reduced wave drag at transonic speeds, which were also used as a convenient place to house chaff dispensers. Handley Page proposed to build a further refined Phase 6 Victor, with more fuel and capable of carrying up to 4 Skybolt ballistic missiles on standing airborne patrols. But this proposal was rejected, although it was agreed that some of the Victor B-2s on order would be fitted to carry 2 Skybolts. This plan was abandoned when the U.S. cancelled the whole Skybolt program in 1963. With the move to low-level penetration missions, the Victors were fitted with air-to-air refueling probes above the cockpit and received large underwing fuel tanks. 9 B-2 aircraft were converted for strategic reconnaissance purposes to replace Valiants which had been withdrawn due to wing fatigue, with delivery beginning in July 1965. These aircraft received a variety of cameras, a bomb bay-mounted radar mapping system and wingtop sniffers to detect particles released from nuclear testing. Designated Victor Senior. 2. A single aircraft could photograph the whole of the United Kingdom in a single 2-hour sortie. Different camera configurations could be installed in the bomb bay, including up to 4 F-49 survey cameras and up to 8 F-96 cameras could be fitted to take vertical or oblique daylight photography. Nighttime photography required the fitting of F-89 cameras. Aerial refueling conversion. The withdrawal of the Valiant fleet because of metal fatigue in December 1964 meant that the RAF had no frontline tanker aircraft, so the B-1/1A aircraft, now judged to be surplus in the strategic bomber role, were refitted for this duty. To get some tankers into service as quickly as possible, 6 B-1A aircraft were converted to B-1A standard, receiving a 2-point system with a hose and drogue carried under each wing, while the bomb bay remained available for weapons. Handley Page worked day and night to convert these 6 aircraft, with the first being delivered on the 28th of April 1965, and 55 Squadron becoming operational in the tanker role in August 1965. While these 6 aircraft provided a limited tanker capability suitable for refueling fighters, the Mk-20A wing hose reels could only deliver fuel at a limited rate and were not suitable for refueling bombers. Work therefore continued to produce a definitive 3-point tanker conversion of the Victor Mk-1. 14 further B-1A and 11 B-1 were fitted with 2 permanently fitted fuel tanks in the bomb bay, and a high-capacity Mk-17 centerline hose dispenser unit with 3 times the fuel flow rate as the wing reels, and were designated K-1A and K-1 respectively. The remaining B-2 aircraft were not as suited to the low-level mission profile that the RAF had adopted for carrying out strategic bombing missions as the Vulcan, with its strong delta wing. This, combined with the switch of the nuclear deterrent from the RAF to the Royal Navy, meant that the Victors were considered to be surplus to requirements. Hence, 24 B-2 were modified to K-2 standard. Similar to the K-1/1A conversions, the wing was trimmed to reduce stress and the bomb aimer's nose glazing was plaited over. During 1982, the glazing was reintroduced on some aircraft, the former nose bomb aimer's position having been used to mount F-95 cameras in order to perform reconnaissance missions during the Falklands War. The K-2 could carry 91,000 pounds of fuel. It served in the tanker role until withdrawn in October 1993. Design. Overview: The Victor was a futuristic-looking, streamlined aircraft, with 4 turbojet engines buried in the thick wing roots. Distinguishing features of the Victor were its highly swept detail with considerable dihedral on the tail planes, and a prominent chin bulge that contained the targeting radar, cockpit, nose landing gear unit and an auxiliary bomb aimer's position. It was originally required by the specification that the whole nose section could be detached at high altitudes to act as an escape pod, but the Air Ministry abandoned this demand in 1950. The Victor had a 5-man crew, comprising the 2 pilots seated side by side and 3 rearward-facing crew, these being the navigator, plotter, the navigator, radar operator, and the air electronics officer. Unlike the Vulcan and Valiant, the Victor's pilots sat at the same level as the rest of the crew, thanks to a larger pressurized compartment that extended all the way to the nose. As with the other V-bombers, only the pilots were provided with ejection seats, the 3 systems operators relying on explosive cushions inflated by a CO2 bottle that would help them from the seats and towards a traditional bailout in the event of high G-loading. But despite this, escape from the 3 backseaters was extremely difficult. While assigned to the nuclear delivery role, the Victor was finished in an all-over anti-flash white color scheme, designed to protect the aircraft against the damaging effects of a nuclear detonation. The white color scheme was intended to reflect heat away from the aircraft. Paler variations of RAF's roundels were also applied for this same reason. When the V-bombers were assigned to the low-level approach profile in the 1960s, the Victors were soon repainted in green-gray tactical camouflage to reduce visibility to ground observation. The same scheme was applied to subsequently converted tanker aircraft. Armaments and equipment: the Victor's bomb bay was much larger than that of the Valiant and Vulcan, which allowed heavier weapon loads to be carried at the cost of range. As an alternative to the single 10,000 pounds nuclear bomb as required by the specification, the bomb bay was designed to carry several conventional armaments, including a single 22,000 pounds Grand Slammer, 2 12,000 pounds Tallboy earthquake bombs, up to 48 1,000 pounds bombs, and 39 2,000 pounds sea mines. One proposed addition to the Victor were underwing panniers capable of carrying a further 28 1,000 pounds bombs to supplement the main bomb bay, but this option was not pursued. In addition to a range of free-fall nuclear bombs, later Victor B-2s operated as missile carriers for standoff nuclear missiles such as Blue Steel. It had been intended for the American Skybolt missile to be introduced, however, development of Skybolt was cancelled. Target information for Blue Steel could be input during flight, as well in advance of the mission. It was reported that, with intensive work, a B-2 missile carrier could revert to carrying free-fall nuclear weapons or conventional munitions within 30 hours. Like its sibling V-bombers, the Victor made use of the navigational and bombing system. A little-used optical sight had also been installed upon early aircraft. For navigation and bomb aiming purposes, the Victor employed numerous radar systems. These included the H-2S radar, the first airborne ground scanning radar, and the green satin radar. Radar information was inputted into the onboard electromechanical analog bomb aiming apparatus. Some of the navigation and targeting equipment was either directly descended from, or shared concepts with, those used on Handley Page's preceding Halifax bomber. Operationally, the accuracy of the bomb aiming system proved to be limited to roughly 400 yards, which was deemed sufficient for high-level nuclear strike operations. Avionics and Systems. The Victor had fully duplicated powered controls. Many of the flight controls and flight surfaces were designed with redundancies. Pilot control movements were transmitted via a low-friction mechanical system. This setup was developed to provide, amongst other capabilities, a level of artificial feel to the pilot. 8 separated hydraulic circuits were present on the aircraft, which comprised the alighting gear, flaps, nose flaps, air brakes, bomb doors, wheel brakes, nose wheel steering, and the ram air turbine scoops. An AC electrical system and auxiliary power unit were significant additions upon the later Victor B-2, electrical reliability being noticeably improved. To evade enemy detection and interception efforts, the Victor was outfitted with an extensive electronic countermeasures suite which were operated by the Air Electronics Officer, who had primary responsibility for the aircraft's electronics and communication systems. The ECM equipment could be employed to disrupt effective use of both active and passive radar in the vicinity of the aircraft, and to provide situational awareness for the crew. Enemy communications could also be jammed, and radar-guided missiles of the era were also reportedly rendered ineffective. The Victor B-2 featured an extended area located around the base of the tail fin which contained cooling systems and some of the ECM equipment. Some of the ECM equipment which initially saw use on the Victor, such as the original chaff dispenser and orange putter tail warning radar, had been developed for the earlier English electric Canberra bomber and were already considered to be near obsolete by the time the Victor had entered service. Significant improvements and alterations would be made to the avionics and ECM suites, as effective ECMs had been deemed critical to the Victor's role. For example, the introduction of the more capable red steer tail warning radar. The introduction of the Victor B-2 was accompanied by several new ECM systems, including a passive radar warning receiver, a metric radar jammer and communications jamming equipment. Streamlined fairings on the trailing edges of the wings that could house large quantities of defensive chaff flares were also new additions. While trials were conducted with terrain-following radar and a side-scan mode for the bombing and navigation radar, neither of these functions were integrated into the operational fleet. Engines. The Victor B-1 was powered by an arrangement of 4 Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire turbojet engines. The engines were embedded in pairs into the aircraft's wing root. Because of the high-mounted position of the wing, the tail had to adopt a high mounting to maintain clearance of the jet turbulence. However, the air brakes were ideally situated to take advantage of this phenomenon. Difficulties were encountered with the Sapphires when stationed in tropical environments. Several engines were destroyed by the turbine blades, striking the outer engine casing. The Victor B-2 adopted the newer Rolls-Royce Conway turbofan. The Conway at one point held the distinction of being the most powerful non-afterburning engine outside of the Soviet Union, and were significantly more powerful than the preceding Sapphire engines employed on the B-1. The Victor B-2 featured a distinct change in the aircraft's engine arrangements. Incorporated into the right-wing root was a Blackburn outhouse to airborne auxiliary power unit, effectively a small fifth engine. The AAPU was capable of providing high-pressure air for starting the main engines, and also providing electrical power on the ground or alternatively in the air as an emergency backup in the event of main engine engine failures. The AAPU also acted to reduce the need for external specialist support equipment. Turbine-driven alternators, otherwise known as ram air turbines, had been introduced on the B-2 to provide emergency power in the event of electrical or hydraulic power being lost. Retractable scoops in the rear fuselage would open to feed ram air into the rats, which would provide sufficient electrical power to operate the flight controls. In the event of engine flame-out, rats would assist the crew in maintaining control of the aircraft until the main engines could be relit. Flight profile. The Victor was commonly described as having good handling and excellent performance, along with favorable low-speed flight characteristics. During the flight tests of the first prototype, the Victor proved its aerodynamic performance, flying up to Mach 0.98 without handling or buffeting problems. There were next to no aerodynamic changes between prototype and production aircraft. Production aircraft featured an automated nose flap operation to counteract a tendency for the aircraft to pitch upwards during low to moderate Mach numbers. At low altitude, the Victor typically flew in a smooth and comfortable manner, in part due to its narrowness and flexibility of the crescent wing. One unusual flight characteristic of the early Victor was its self-landing capability. Once lined up with the runway, the aircraft would naturally flare as the wing entered into ground effect while the tail continued to sink, giving a cushioned landing without any command or intervention by the pilot. The Victor has been described as an agile aircraft, atypical for a large bomber aircraft. In 1958, a Victor had performed several loops and a barrel roll during practices for a display flight at Farnborough Air Show. Maneuverability was greatly enabled by the light controls, quick response of the aircraft, and the design of certain flight surfaces such as the infinitely variable tail-mounted air brake. The Victor was designed for flight at high subsonic speeds, although multiple instances have occurred in which the sound barrier was broken. During development of the Victor B-2, the RAF had stressed the concept of tactical maneuverability, which led to much effort in development being given to increasing the aircraft's height and range performance.